Hi, Year 11. Welcome to Week 7's extended essay workshop. I am not there with you today, but I would like you to pay attention to this video. You can look back on it whenever you need to as well. In today's session, we are going to look at what a good research question looks like. So at the moment, you should be working on your annotated bibliography. In today's session, you need to have submitted one of your annotated bibliographies to Google Classroom. And you know that you have a deadline fast approaching where you need to submit an annotated bibliography and a draft research question. So you know what you're doing for the first half of that with your bibliographies. And today we're going to look at, well, how do I write a good research question? So we briefly looked at how to narrow down a topic last session. Once you've narrowed down your topic, it means that you can start looking at a good focal point for your research question. So I want you to take a look at both options that you see on the screen, both the questions, and I want you to write down in your extended essay book which question that you see on the screen is clearer. Is it question A or question B? And I also want you to write down 2 reasons why you think it's A or why you think it's B. So you can pause this video. Okay, so question A, why are social networking sites harmful? Or question B, how are online users experiencing or addressing privacy issues on such social networking sites like MySpace and Facebook? So if you said that B was the more clear research question, you are correct. Why is it more clear? I guess the other version of this question, it doesn't really specify which social networking sites or tell us what kind of harm those sites are causing. So if we go back and have a look, it's just why are social networking sites harmful? Now, I want you to reflect for a second. That might be the style of question that you've got so far. We call that an inquiry question. Those sorts of questions are just questions that help you figure out what you should be researching. So you might look into, well, why are social networking sites harmful? And you might do one annotated bibliography on a really good source that talks about the dangers of social networking. And that might give you an idea of how you can start to form a research question from that. But it's not something that can actually be answered. Why are social networking sites harmful? It doesn't really give us any way to work with. So it also assumes that harm is the only thing that social networking has, that there's no positive sides of social networking. The clearer version here as well, so option B, it specifies as well particular sites. So you can't look at TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, YouTube. You can't look at everything in 4,000 words. So you need to specify, well, which social networking am I going to look at? Which social networking sites or apps will I use? It also specifies the type of harm. So it talks about actual privacy issues and who the issue is actually harming. So there's a lot of different ways here that we can see that this research question is a lot clearer than the other question. And the last thing is, and I want everyone to write this down, a strong research question should never leave room for anything that's ambiguous or any other interpretation. It should be really clear what you're researching, who you're researching about, okay, and the actual subtopics within your big topic as well. So please write down that last dot point because it's really important. Let's have a look at a second one. Same thing. Read both questions on the screen, and I want you this time to tell me which one is more focused. So write down in your book which one's more focused and give 1 or 2 reasons why you think it's A or why you think it's B, and you can pause this video here. Okay, so question A, what is the effect on the environment from global warming? Or question B, how is glacial melting affecting penguins in the Arctic Circle? I think that we can easily say that question B is more focused, okay? Why is that? Because the first question is so broad. There's no way we could answer that, okay, in a 4,000 word essay. I would actually think we'd struggle to answer that in one book. You might have to write several books on that first question. Um, The other version that we see on the screen here as well, it really narrows down to an actual specific cause. Okay, glacial melting, one actual particular topic. Okay, that can be researched. It narrows it down as well to a specific place. We're just looking at the Arctic Circle. In the first one, it didn't specify a location. And also, there's a specific group. We're looking at penguins. Okay, we can't look at everything. We can only look at a particular group or groups. So my biggest thing with research question writing is, and my biggest tip is, when in doubt, make a research question as narrow and as focused as possible. Some of the feedback that I'm going to give you this week as well from your supervisors, and I know you haven't been assigned a supervisor yet, but you will be, is that your topics are really, really broad. For a few people, I've told you that as well. I've said that's way too broad. You can't just say behavioral psychology. I need way more detail than that. So this is what I'm looking for. If that's feedback that you've received from me or that you received from your teacher, this is what we're talking about. Okay. All right. Last one, guys. Now, which question is more complex? Question A, have a read. Question B, have a read. Tell me which one is more complex. Why is it more complex, do you think? And you can pause this video here while you do that. So, I think very easily the one that's more wordy is obviously going to be the one that's more complex. Okay. Now, the simple version of this question, let's go back and have a look. How are doctors addressing diabetes in the US? I could literally Google that and spend a night coming up with a few answers from a few different sources. So I could answer that in like maybe 5 to 10 bullet points. There's no room for analysis. There's no way I'd have enough to write about in a 4,000 word essay. The more complex version you see on the screen as well here, guys, you'll notice it's broken into two parts. So it says, what are the common traits of those suffering from diabetes, where in America, but also how can these commonalities be used to aid the medical community? So there's some thought-provoking sense to it, and it actually requires some significant investigation and evaluation. There's some research, very important research that would take place here. All right. Now, as a general rule of thumb, and why I'm showing you this, if you know that you can answer your question just with a quick Google search, it's not a very effective question. Okay, so it's about being balanced between being complex, but also being focused as well, and also being clear and concise. Okay, so on that note, and one last thing I want to talk about, this is an excerpt from your extended essay textbook. If you go to the chapter on research questions, this is something that the IB definitely looks for in your questions. So on the screen, what you can see is there's a list of question starters that can help you design your own research question. And I've got some descriptions here and some reasons why each sentence starter is effective. Now, the ones the IB loves the most are to what extent. So, to what extent does Burger King have a more nutritious and healthy menu than McDonald's? That's a really, really basic research question. I probably wouldn't use it for an extended essay, but that's how I would word it. Okay, to what extent means how much. So you'll see here it says, and it allows for an evaluation of the degree to some extent, to a large extent, to a small extent, to a considerable extent. Okay. Other ones, how successful is, what is the contribution or influence of. So have a read of just some of these sentence starters. And you'll notice that some of them might be a little bit more effective for different subject areas, particularly if you're doing the sciences or math as well. In our session next week, I'm going to show you where you can find some exemplar extended essays for each subject area. And you can also have a look at the different sorts of research questions that those students have written. Okay, so you'll also find this in your EE textbook. Now, an important concept to understand when it comes to writing a research question is the difference between a really narrow question, as I mentioned, and a really broad research question. So if your topic is nice and narrow, Okay, what it means is that you can deal with it in depth. Because it's narrow, it's focused, it's specific, it means you can dig nice and deeply into that topic and find as much information and do as much analysis and evaluation as you can. If it's too broad, like this dish on the right hand side here, you can only really get into that topic in a superficial way because you're trying to cover too much information with not enough words. So it becomes a very shallow analysis, a very shallow investigation. Let's say, for example, if you're an economics student, you can't look at the whole of China in your investigation. You really can't because China's huge. You can't look at the whole of Russia. I would argue you probably couldn't look at the whole of the UAE. You might need to focus on a particular emirate as well. So, those are things to think about. It's also what we spoke about last week, guys. I'm going to show this to you again. It's a matter of narrowing down your topic first. So, let's take a look at this again. I know we did this last week, but it's important for you to remember because in a moment we are going to start to brainstorm some research questions. So, this might be your topic. All right, the theme of love and relationships in 19th century literature. Well, that's way too broad. It's like the dish on the right hand side from the previous screen. 19th century literature, there are so many books, there are so many works. Which ones are we talking about specifically? Okay, let's look at Jane Austen. She's an author from that time period. I'll look at Jane Austen. Awesome. Jane Austen didn't just write one book, she wrote several. So let's narrow it down again. What specific works? Okay, I'm going to choose Pride and Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice is a novel. That's the one I'm looking at. I'm just going to look at the theme of love and relationships. Your supervisor might then say, great, so love, relationships. That's pretty broad. Can you specify what relationships, please? Okay, fine. Let me get a little bit more narrow. Austen's attitudes then towards love and marriage in Pride and Prejudice. So I've narrowed down the relationships now. First, I narrowed down the works, okay, to a particular text and author. Now I'm looking at particular relationships. I'm not looking at friendships. I'm not looking at family relationships, or I might be in love and marriage, but particularly I want to look at these two here, not just all relationships, okay? So I have a refined topic. Awesome. Now watch what happens next. I need to take my refined topic and I need to translate it or try and rework it into a research question. So, if I take something from the extended essay book that I just showed you a little excerpt from that on the screen, let's say my sentence starter is how is or how are. Here's my research question. How are Jane Austen's attitudes towards the themes of love and marriage innately expressed in her work, Pride and Prejudice? And you'll see what I have here is I have a refined, clear focus, and it's something that's researchable in 4,000 words. Okay, it's going to allow me to answer that within the word limit. Now, there's a number of things I'm going to have to look at researching in order to answer my research question. I need to know, well, what are Jane Austen's attitudes first and foremost? Jane Austen is no longer alive, so I might need to actually research her life. What happened in her life? What's her history? What sort of things had an influence on why she wrote the novels that she wrote? Because she wrote a lot about love and relationships. Okay. Are there any interviews that exist? Are there any quotes that she had? Are there people who wrote about Jane Austen and her life? Or I could find maybe what her attitudes were. Maybe she never married. Maybe she didn't have a huge family and she was always, desiring a huge family. And that's why she wrote these books about love and marriage and big families, for example. So I need to find a lot of information about the author. I also need to find out some information about, or I need to analyze how love and how marriage has been portrayed in Pride and Prejudice. And then I need to see, are there any links between what happened in Jane Austen's life and what she thought and what happens in this novel, Pride and Prejudice? Okay, so you can see that my research isn't just going to be on Pride and Prejudice, the novel. That's a school-based essay. I actually need to go and have a look at, well, what was happening in the 19th century when Jane Austen lived? What are some research factors about her life that I could include? And then I need to figure out if there's any links possibly between her attitudes, the research I find about Jane Austen, and what I've analyzed in my novel. Okay? So, guys, what we're going to do now is I would like you to take a moment to reflect on the topics that I asked you to write down and submit, probably in March actually, but we had a look at that last week as well. And I would like you to have a look at what you see on the screen. Can you do this for your actual topic? Can you go through this process of refining your topic a little bit deeper? Okay. In the next week, you are going to need to have a crack at your research question. Now, today is the 25th of May, and you know that you have your annotated bibliography and your draft research question due on, I believe, June the 8th. So, what you need to do now is you need to spend some time narrowing down your topic. And today you can have a go at trying to write a research question, but by this time next week, you are going to need to show me a draft research question, and I will talk you through whether or not that is researchable. We'll have a couple of supervisors, hopefully, with us next week as well, who will help you out with that. Okay. What will happen then, guys, is that your supervisors will take a look at your annotated bibliography. They'll also take a look at your research question and they will say, yes, good, or we need to rework this before you actually start to plan out your essay and write your essay introduction and keep researching. Okay? So let's have a crack at it, guys. Looking at your topics that you have, trying to narrow it down to something more specific. And if you've done that, let's have a go at writing out a draft research question.